Good morning, good evening, and good night to everyone here. I am Casey and I'm an IB alumni, and I am going to give you all the tips, all the knowledge of English A that every IB student should have if you're taking English A. And me personally, I wish I could send myself this information back in time. Maybe for sure this would have helped me, but this will now help you guys. So let's just get straight into this. So the English A program, this is just very general information that comes from the website, but um I'm just going to very briefly go over it. So obviously in higher level, it's only 240 class hours, while standard level requires 150 minimum, but some schools like to really standardize this time, so maybe it'll be similar across both. Um, Next, generally they like to they it's a really important aspect of English A for communication to come through, where text, audience, and purpose they all intermingle and mix and provide to give this sort of effect on the reader. And this is what students in English A will be tackling, but we won't really get into much of that yet. Next, we have how the construction of meaning is developed through the exploration of text. So when we're going to be seeing a lot of types of texts throughout the program, and each of them has a meaning and each of them has a purpose. And we'll figure all of this out throughout the course of this 150 minimum hours. And what kind of text types there are, what the literary forms are. And then, of course, in this course, you're going to have the typical exams. The exams generally will be like they'll mimic IB exams. It'll be very formal. There'll be oral courseworks, and we have oral tests. Um, but generally, this is IB wants you to listen, to speak, read, view, present, and perform. So that's just the gist of it. But we'll get deep dive into what you do in English. So in English A, you will be given four or six, depending on what you choose, HL or SL, books. These are called literary works, and literary works they're just novels, maybe collections of poems, just diaries of really important figures, and these will be given to you by the school because they'll give them as a set. And the what you have here as your list is very important because you'll be using these for your exams. So having good knowledge and reading a lot on these books and making your own notes is very important. So as soon as you get these books, I recommend to read them in your own free time because that's something that I didn't really go through. Um, However, with this now, that was what we had. The books here are literary works. But here, there are things called non-literary texts and bodies of work. So there are advertisements, news articles, editorials, instruction manuals, report speeches, personal messages, videos, movies, etc., etc. So in my class, we've even had like TV shows like Black Mirror. We've had campaigns. We've had so many of these non-literary texts. Maybe cartoons. Some of them show up, and it is very important that you keep track of everything that you do in class, because this could be very useful for using it in one of the exam papers. Especially one of the more prevalent ones I remember was Vietnam War photography. That was an example of bodies of work, non-literary texts, and this will be very useful. So just keep those in mind. Sometimes we like to have portfolios where we just list down everything we've learned in class, just so we can look back and we can use them in the future for an exam. So this is the IB grading. It really depends on if you take SL or HL, but if you're just gonna look at the um, boundaries here, the SL and HL have similar weighting for the paper one. Paper two is more strongly weighted in SL because HL has to deal with an extra work called the HL essay. And then both HL and SL have to do the individual oral, and that's okay because the individual oral is sort of early and it's done very, very early into the your second year of IB. But overall, if you're an SL student, you have to deal with three things, and an HL student, you have to deal with four. So, what these three to four things are, I'll dive straight into them actually. So we'll just go straight to paper one. Paper one is analysis of non-lit text. Now, this isn't the same non-lit text that you learn in class. This is going to be brand new and unseen. So think of journal articles, think of blogs that really show up in sort of these um, websites or newspaper articles. Generally, in paper ones, they always come in two types, and you'll be given two in general. Um, they're either image based, so they have a lot of imagery to it. Let's say a comic strip, a cartoon, advertisements, infographics. There's so many symbolisms and iconographies that you really have to focus on. And if there's also text based, so let's say someone's journal, someone's diary entry, a letter, magazine articles, etc., etc. And these are text based. So it's really important for you to and realize whether it's image based or text based because they have different purposes and they have different means and their effects are definitely deliberate from the specific author or designer. So how do we analyze this is each of them have a purpose, as I mentioned here, and the purposes I've made this very ingenious mnemonic and it's called diaper. For every single text, it's either descriptive, informative, argumentative, persuasive, emotive, or it appeals to your reason. And with that, we might be able to cherry pick what each body of work or each non-lit text is talking about. And generally, almost all of them actually love to have persuasive. I think persuasive is the most common, the most strong because they really force the reader to do something, to feel some way, and that's generally the one that's the most common. So just keep an eye out for that. These are my personal strategies for paper one because I was looking for different ways to like unify a method for answering every single kind of um, paper one you'll ever find using a very linearized structure. So I forgot to mention that for SL students, you actually only do you only need to choose one of the paper twos that of the paper one texts that exist. So, example, generally it'll be one of them is going to be like a political cartoon, for example, and the other one's going to be a blog entry. And generally, you just need to choose one out of the two if you're an SL student. But if you're an HL student, you need to do both, and that's very important. Some of my classmates during our mock exams, our preliminary exams, only did one, even though they were HL, and they lost a lot of marks because essentially half of the paper was lost. Um, and was left incomplete. So let's get on with my strategy. So paper one, I love to structure it where you have this very deep introductory paragraph. There's always a hook. And like let's say hook is like um we've had this paper one the other day. It was about like how digital technologies can like affect people's moods and happiness. That reminds me of digital society. But furthermore, I just wrote something about how digital technology has changed our lives in many ways. That's a hook already, and I think you could really branch into other things with that. Um, then after you have that hook, you're gonna need a preamble, like this sort of intro. So I generally like to mention, so it'll always be written that when this was published, who published this, and generally for what purpose. So maybe they are a designer crew and they've made this little informative infographic to inform the public, and where you can access this infographic or when it was made, some background context. Let's say it was made in the 1980s to inform people about how to survive the Great Depression. Sometimes that some kind of context background exists and you need to write it down. Then thesis. Thesis is important. The way I like to do the thesis, and it's always worked for me, is that I prepare what my body paragraph is going to be from the get-go. I know my body paragraphs will always be split into three things. For here it is, right, in the slides where the iconography, like the graphical ideas, the image-based stuff, and then the second paragraph, or sorry, the second body paragraph is going to be how structuring works, how things are positioned to give a certain effect. And language is the very last, where they use ethos, pathos, logos. They use this like very specific choice of words, diction, and many other techniques of persuasion. So using this specific three split, what would the thesis be? It would be the author uses graphical imagery, they use structuring of elements and emotive language to show how important it is to donate money to those who are in need. Something like that. That's a perfect thesis that you take your split for your body and it's already present in your thesis. That's very important. And then now, since you've already had the split, you just branch off of it, you collect everything that fits under it, and then you just write. And then you continue until your hands hurt, because that's English paper one, definitely. If it's text-based, you do structure. I like to do structure. And then there's that something called the text-specific part, which is every single text-based one has their own quirk. Sometimes they like to use strange vocabulary or like colloquialistic vocabulary. I would like to put that there. Or maybe some text-based like blogs have images, so I'd put a separate paragraph for images. And that's that second body paragraph. And then the third one would be language, similar exactly to the image-based one. So the key idea is just split into three and then put in the thesis. I think that's perfect. It's very consistent. You shouldn't find many issues, although maybe the linearization wouldn't be perfect for every text, but for almost every text that I've gone through, I haven't found an issue with this specific structure. Maybe I'd have to tweak it a little bit. So next, the conclusion. This conclusion is uniform for every single piece of writing you're going to do in English. It's always going to be restating the thesis, talking about perspectives and broader implications, global significance, like what does this mean to the world? Why did they make this infographic? Because there was a need to inform people about the dangers of doing something, or there was a need for people to realize that an action needed to be done, a call to action needed to be done. So that's the global implication. And then I like to put a little quote. So maybe I remember a quote from a book I've read, or maybe an article, and I just like to end it with like a little curious quote, and it just wraps up the whole writing perfectly. So, in addition, when you're writing body paragraphs, please use Peel. It's very consistent. Generally, you want your writings to be consistent. If they like shift styles way too often, you'll never know if you're improving or not. And this is perfect. This is a perfect framework to begin with. So next, we're going to go with paper two. Paper two is where we have our 4 to 6 books that we've will be given and that we'll have to read. Yes, 2 of them will be used here, and you're going to compare them exactly. There will be 4 questions, right? There will be 4 questions. Just choose one. Just choose one and just say, how does this connect to the 2 that you chose, the 2 books that you've chosen? So, recap, this is from here, from these 6 or 4 books, if you're choosing SL, 2 of them will be used in this paper. So, very important. So, here we are. There's this website that I love to do practices because they have a lot of samples, some questions from past um, paper two, so give it a try if you guys would like. And my general paper two strategy is like, again, we're going to linearize this because, of course, there's questions, especially in paper two, that love to repeat. They're always similar. Year after year, you're going to find some questions that are similar to one of these because it's sort of an important thing to ask. Power, identity, conflict, right here, character development, narrative, style, and structure, and authorial choices. In fact, I think like three of these showed up in the exam that I had literally just like weeks ago. So paper two strategy is very consistent. So just in fact, you could pre-plan some of these. I've had an exam at school where I effectively practiced a question that was similar to what eventually came out, and I got amazing scores because I was able to really re-articulate that. And this is my favorite tip right here. Again, just split the question into three. So sometimes it'll be, what types of change appear in the two work that you've studied? Oh, let's split types of change into three. So we have emotional change, we have logical change or cognitive change, we have the change in morals, and just write about those three things in three different body paragraphs, and then you're done. It's very simple. It's very um, straightforward, but how do we structure these? So here we are. Introductory paragraph, again with the hook and again with the introduction. It's very linear. Just have the hook. Example, change is something that exists to bring about growth to the people of society. And I think that's a great hook. That's an amazing hook. So right after that, we introduced both works. For example, for me, I had Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. So I said, Joseph Conrad was a Polish English migrant that had come and performed an expedition into the Congo, and he wrote this very insightful book about the horrors that he had seen. And that's already good enough of a background. And if, especially if it ties into what you're going to see later, perfect, absolutely perfect. So let's say Conrad witnessed a lot of changes in the power structures that existed. Perfect background. And of course, do this for the second literary work, for the second literary work. And finally, for the thesis, again, it's the three splits. Just mention the three splits. So again, with the types of change, the two authors effectively use the types of change, such as emotional change, moral change, and any other types of change that you'd like to do, any splits that you've done. And then in order to do this effect, and it implies something globally, and that wraps up your introduction perfectly. So, but the body paragraphs was the body paragraphs were made extremely easy due to this specific format from the Brad Philpott textbook. Its PEACE Act, very easy to remember, is point, evidence, analysis, comparison, evidence again, analysis again, conclusion, and then thesis. So point, make a statement. So like I said earlier, is generally in life or a character tends to undergo an emotional change to show that they have grown or they have matured, etc., etc. And that's your statement, that's your point. Evidence one. Now, what this one means is just the first body of work, the first literary text that you're going to discuss. So, and you're just going to pick a certain moment from the work and show how it applies to this statement. So, example, um, Joseph Conrad's character in the book, that's Marlowe. Marlowe experiences emotional change as he matures into his own independent person. And then there's specific words that are chosen. So Marlowe is shown to be described as someone who's evolved, someone who's standing in the position of a Buddha. That is an example of an evidence that you can place that comes from the book. And an analysis is just this feature effectively implies that the character had changed. For the reader feels extremely inclined to relate because the reader is able to understand why this change is significant. And in fact, maybe there's a foreshadowing that in the beginning, the change were so and so. So this analysis, why it's effective. So here, why it's effective to talk about this specific analysis, why it matches the thesis, write it down. Your comparison. So in contrast, the second book, the second literary work does it in this way. Or similarly, the other book uses these techniques. So you can do opposing or similar. So they can be differently, like they can use different types of features and or they can use similar-ish features, so it's the same. Then just repeat the evidence and analysis from the same way as we've done for the first literary work. And now we just go back to the conclusion. Conclusion is how do these evidences connect to the point, not the thesis, and then the thesis, the T, tie the whole paragraph back to the thesis. And then next we have our closing paragraph. So our again, same thing, restate the thesis, the broad implications, the significance on the world, and you can add a closing statement and a quote. I love to do this. This is the same exact thing as paper one, but just use this and it's insanely consistent. Next is IO, and I'm not afraid to admit that the IO is very difficult, but you have what you need for the IO first. Okay, so you have the four books, as we mentioned earlier. Paper two, just remember two needs two books. If you're SL, you only have two books left. If you're HL, you have another two. So for the IO, you need one more. One more. So in total, as of now, as of the running total, you're gonna use three books, three literary works. So in SL, you'll remain with one more, and in HL, you'll remain with three more. So and aside from that, you're gonna also need the non-lit texts, but this is specifically the ones that you study in class. So you can't just take it from anywhere. This has to be one that you study in a class. If you really want to discuss something specific, you can tell your teacher that you want to potentially use it and study it in class. So next, after that, after you've gotten your two choices for your non-lit and your lit, you will need one global issue. Global issues, what are they? We'll discuss that later. You need one global issue and two works. The IO happens way before, like almost 6 months before the actual like IB exams for paper one, paper two. So in fact, if you could spend some time to just prepare for the IO, amazing. And of course, you cannot repeat works as it's uh, absolutely necessary for you to use different works for every single thing you do. So paper two, you use story A, story B, but then for your IO, you cannot use story A, story B. You need to use story C, example. So that's how the IO works. And with my teacher, of course, and I believe this should be universal, you will be given 10 bullet points. These bullet points, you can um, give them to your teacher, and you can bring these on the day you do your IO. So I guess you don't have to fully memorize everything. You could, absolutely. It could make your quality way better, but your time is very limited. So these are the strategies. So what is a global issue? Well, global issue is here in this middle part. It has a significance on the wide scale. It is transnational, meaning it is not just limited to one country. You can feel it everywhere. And then, of course, it can be felt every time, every day context. So it should be in this list. This is taken specifically from the IB syllabus, where it's either culture, identity, and community, beliefs, values, and education, politics, power, injustice, art, creativity, and the imagination, as well as science, technology, and the environment. So take one of the one, two, three, four, five different subcategories we have, make sure it's clear, and add it to your list. So now you choose an extract. So obviously, you're gonna have a long, very, very dense book. Just make sure You're only limited to 40 lines. So what does 40 lines mean? In the book, you take 40 lines only. So how do you know which one to take? Which of these 40 lines is the most important? Just choose a very rich one. So one that has many features, many implications, talks about a lot. And as long as you can spend a whole 5 minutes of non-stop talking, even mentally, if mentally you can talk for 10 minutes about this one 40-line extract, you're good, even though you only need to speak for five, but for mental clarity, absolutely. And you'll be given 10 minutes to speak in the oral. Now, in these 10 minutes, obviously you're going to want to divide them into two, right? Because you have two works. One is the literary work, one is the non-literary work. So there you go. And then you'll be given another 5 minutes right after the 10 minutes to do sort of this question and answer Q&A session. So um, in the 10 minutes that you'll be given to speak, for the 5 minutes, the best strategy is 1 minute to introduce, 2 minutes to zoom into the work. So as in zoom into the lines, zoom into the picture, zoom into something, then you zoom out as in you see the whole thing as a in general, its outline, it's what it implies. And then just repeat this for the next work, and then you'll easily breeze through. But try your best to speak about a lot because 5 minutes generally is not a lot of time. And that time pressure is very, very felt. Initially, you'll feel how it's not enough time, but then over time, you're going to feel super underwhelmed or super overwhelmed by the fact that there's not enough time. And of course, um, recommend that this is something that I didn't do. Just pre-prepare the individual oral way before you get to grade 12. In the 5 minutes after you do your 10-minute speaking time, your teacher will ask you Q&A questions. And in these Q&A questions, these are the very, very common ones that will show up very often. So you guys can have a look, or you guys can generally access this slide in the description. Everything will be here. Um, with these Q&A questions, you tend to prepare for them. You speak based on the global issue, you speak based on what the text does. It'll be specific to the text sometimes. Sometimes the teacher will say, you mentioned how this is true. You mentioned how the character was done this way. Why do you think the author did that? And then you just answer. I think this is generally the best way is to prepare some general notes about each story, about each work, and I think you'll be on your way. Now, the higher level essay. Now, me personally, I did not take English HL, but I've had some very nice tips from some of my friends who did. So, the higher level essay is choosing one literary work from the six you're given. So, we're guaranteed to be taking HL here, and you'll have one of the six. So, you're going to have two for paper two, then you're going to have this one from IO, and then you're left with one more that you need to take for the HLE, and you're left with two more that are completely unused. So just remember that you'll be using four. Now it's the same as an IO. It's very similar. You also talk about a global issue and how this text connects to the global issue. So my friend said you'll be needing to just look. So this isn't just an extract. You go through the whole book and you look for linguistic devices, and you want to focus on the authorial's choices and how things are portrayed, because this portrayal means something to the global issue, and that's what you want to talk about. You can have external sources to talk about some things that are related to it, but obviously, don't incriminate yourself with external sources that generally completes your HLE without your contribution. So, some of my friends, they've done definitions. So, what is the definition of morality? What is the definition of um, love, and etc., etc.? That's what they've done, and they've taken external resources. My friend specifically says that it's best to choose a book first and then a global issue based on the book. So you don't have to struggle looking for a global issue that seems really interesting and then scramming through all of the books, scrambling and finding the most suitable one. That's sort of difficult. And make a map, as in just make divisions like this little mind map and what each book talks about, each book's subsections, and connect it. Each dialogue, important notes about each book, very important for this higher level essay. You'll have an easier time with it, definitely. And furthermore, you're going to have, for the structure, yes, you're going to have this intro. It's exactly the same. You're going to hook, introduce the book, and then the thesis. Now, the thesis is for the HLE, you could break down the thesis. So not just break down your body, the body paragraphs, you break down the thesis and what the definitions are you looking for. So, for example, you have morality. So what is morality? Morality is defined as this, and so on and so on. So you could place that in your introduction. In your body paragraphs, you just use peel and you write a lot. Um, I believe this is 1,500 words, so you can divide the words very equally. And then after that, you have your conclusion. Again, exactly the same conclusion for the other types of English A works. So it's very consistent and it'll be worth the while to use this format. Now we're going to be going into the general final tips that I guess would help you in a general way. I guess help you through your journey in general. So first of all, evaluate each literary work. So what I mean by that is go into each literary work, each book you're given, generally it's a book, and write down things about it and just in fact pre-plan. Sometimes for me personally, I had to go over and I say this book isn't really flexible. So example, I didn't really like this book. It was very specific. So I'd rather place in my IO and tie it to a global issue. And then I can leave the other three books for paper two, and I can just pick and choose which one's the most suitable, um, giving me more breathing room. For HL, obviously, you'll have a lot of breathing room, but it's the same thing because you'll still need to know what you're going to use for HLE and for the IO, and you will not be able to use those in paper two. So it'll give you some time to think and how flexible each text is. So, evaluation. Next, this is an important tip that is what I have done only a little bit, and I wish I'd done a little more, is to read during the holidays. So, when you have the time, when you have a break, just read maybe a chapter or two a day, and you'll get through the books very, very quickly before the teacher instructs maybe the next semester or the semesters after. If you read sooner, you will have less issues understanding the story and what the teacher does, and generally you'll be way ahead of um, everyone else when it comes to the books. And of course, this is one tip that is very controversial. I know some people outside generally say that lit charts is not that good, but if it does exist, please use it. It is amazing. It saves a lot of time. They've done the analysis already, and all you need to do is just take notes of what they've done. But obviously, if you could analyze yourself, it would be miles better because you can understand things yourself. Although definitely there are some very, very niche and very difficult to see things that the people at lit charts or the people from any online resources have done. So please indulge yourselves. Next, of course, you could hypothetically pre-prep your paper two. So like I said, paper two always has the same exact types of questions come up over and over. You could maybe make a plan example for each of them, and then you can just memorize it. And then when your paper two comes out, you can say, oh, I've done a question that's very similar, and I know I can get a good score here. So that's very, very helpful. And your IO, same thing, but obviously instead of waiting for the time that the IO is properly introduced, just go for it. Just straight away go for it. So start early, absolutely, because it'll save you so much time, so much stress. And this is a tip that is important because even though we're in English A, don't worry about vocab that much. So I like to place a lot of very um, strong vocabulary words, these very stretchy, these very out of out of syllabus words. And I have a friend who simply just focuses on getting the task at hand finished and not really focusing on the vocab. And we roughly score the same. So definitely the vocab doesn't matter too much. Although if you could slip some in and it doesn't sound weird, like you're very natural when you do it, absolutely use these vocabulary words. And this is the most important tip. This is a tip that everyone has agreed with. Just be calm because generally you need thinking room for doing English tests. When you do any English A test, you need time to plan. 5 to 10 minutes planned. Be calm. Just write down what you think you're going to do, the three splits that you're going to do for paper one and paper two, and then just expand, just start thinking. Don't panic. Because obviously when you panic, there's nothing that's going to be coming out of your memory. So please be calm and you'll make it through. And that's it. I hope the best for anyone who's willing to take English A on their IB journey. I'm very sorry because I'm not able to provide tips on the English EE. I recommend taking language B, EE. I think it's way more lenient, but English A, EE, I will provide some tips in the description if I am able to uh, give some and get some from some of my friends. But overall, good luck on your IB journey. This has been Casey signing out. If there are more tips needed, please let us know. Maybe we'll respond to them. Thank you.